Good afternoon, and welcome to a new chapter read aloud. This will be our last chapter read aloud for the summer. We'll do this week and next week, and after that it'll be September. So school is lurking right there for you. This is another book in the series Rick Riordan presents. It's called Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky. Isn't that a great title? And look at the cover. We see Tristan, and behind him is a character from African American folklore. And you can see he has a big hammer. And this is John Henry. And as you know, John Henry was the big man. And I'm going to read you what's on the flyleaf. And I'm also going to show you this wonderful map. Here is one side of it. And then we'll flip to the back of the book and show you the other side. Don't you love books that come with maps? I think it's always so cool. So, 7th grader Tristan Strong feels anything but strong ever since he failed to save his best friend when they were in a bus accident together. All he has left of Eddie is the journal his friend wrote stories in. Tristan is dreading the month he's going to spend on his grandparents' farm in Alabama, where he's being sent to heal from the tragedy. On his first night there, a sticky creature shows up in his bedroom and steals Eddie's journal. Tristan chases it. Is that a doll? Through the forest, and a tug-of-war ensues by his grandmother's mysterious and off-limits bottle tree. In a last attempt to wrest the journal out of the creature's hands, Tristan punches the tree, accidentally ripping a hole in the sky above Mid-Pass, a volatile place with a burning sea, haunted bone ships, and iron monsters that are hunting the inhabitants of this strange world. Tristan finds himself in the middle of a battle that has left Black American gods John Henry and Brer Rabbit exhausted. In order to get back home, Tristan and his new allies will need to entice the god Anansi, the Weaver, to come out of hiding and steal the hole in the sky, and seal the hole in the sky. But bartering with the trickster Anansi always comes at a price. Can Tristan save this world before he loses more of the things that he loves? So the author, Kwame Mbalia, has taken West African folklore and African American folklore to create this wonderful story. And his dedication is for the stories untold and the children who tell them. So we'll go to chapter 1, The Car Ride. There was a rhythm in my fists. Pop, pop. It told a story. Pop, pop. Everybody thought they knew the story. They'd seen it before. They'll get over it. It's a phase. Give them space. But they only knew fragments. I didn't want to hear the rest. Oh, you do? Well, what if I told you that I went to war over my dead best friend's glowing journal? Or that I battled monsters, big and small, with powers I didn't know I had, with gods I didn't know existed? Would you believe me? Nah, you wouldn't. You got your own problems. You don't want to hear about my struggles, right? Oh, you do? Well, I gotta warn you, it's a wild ride, so buckle up, champ. Let me give you some truth, and I hope it returns back to me. Tristan, they're here. Pop! Mom's shout interrupted my groove. I stopped pummeling the small punching bag Dad had installed in my room and loosened the straps on my boxing gloves with my teeth. The gloves fell on the bed, and I dropped down next to them. Eddie's journal sat on my teeny desk in the opposite corner. Still glowing, still unopened since his mother had given it to me after the funeral 2 weeks ago. My room was so small that I could have reached out and grabbed the leather book, but that would mean dealing with it, and who deals with their problems by choice? Pfft, not me. Tristan Strong, my dad yelled from down the hall. I hated that name. It made me appear to be something I'm not. My name should have been Tristan Coward, or Tristan Failure, or Tristan Fake, maybe Tristan, how could you lose your first boxing match? Anything but Tristan Strong. Mom's footsteps echoed through our teeny apartment, and then soft knocking sounded on my door. Tristan, baby, did you hear me? I cleared my throat. Yeah, I'm coming. The door opened and Mom peeked in. She was still wearing the Team Strong t-shirt from last night. I don't think any of us had gotten much sleep after we came back from my first bout. I stayed up nursing my pride, the only thing I really injured. My little fan club, Dad, Mom, and my grandparents on Dad's side, had tried to cheer me up, but I could see the disappointment written on everyone's faces, so I pretended to go to bed while they held whispered discussions unto the wee hours of the morning. And now it was dawn, time to get this show on the road. Mom's eyes took in the organized chaos of my room and crinkled when they landed on me. She crossed the floor in 2 steps, avoiding yesterday's untouched dinner in the process, and sat down on the mattress. "It's only for a month," she said, not even play acting that she didn't know what was wrong. "I know. It'll be good for you to get away." "I know." She rubbed my head, then pulled me into a hug. The grief counselor said it would be good to get a change of scenery, some fresh air, work around the farm. Who knows, maybe you'll find out you were meant to work the land. I shrugged. The only thing I was sure of was that I wasn't meant to be a boxer, despite what Dad and Granddad thought. I pulled free of Mom's hug, stood, grabbed my duffel bag, and headed out to start my month of exile. "Aren't you forgetting something?" Mom asked. I turned, and she held Eddie's journal out to me. Her hand and wrist were bathed in the emerald green glow that was coming from the cover. But, like everyone else I'd shown the journal to, she didn't notice any strange light. Mom mistook my confused frown for apprehension as she slipped the book in my bag. "He wanted you to have it, Tristan. I know it's tough, but try to read it when you can, okay?" I didn't trust myself to speak, so I nodded and headed to the front door. The decision to ship me to Granddad and Nana Strong's farm down in Alabama had been made without my input. Typical. My parents had talked about it a few times before, but after Eddie's death and my 3rd school fight in the final 2 weeks before summer break, well, I guess the time was right. At least I'd held my own in those school fights, unlike in the ring last night. It was just my luck that my grandfather had been here to witness my humiliation. "You outweighed that other kid by 7 pounds, Granddad had said after the match, in his growling rasp of a voice. "Set the family name back a decade." That's me, Tristan Disappointment. Son of Alvin Wrecking Ball Strong, the best middleweight boxer to come out of Chicago in nearly 20 years. I had Dad's height and Granddad's chin, and boxing was supposed to run in my veins. I'd worn Granddad's old trunks, and Dad had worked my corner. The Strong legacy was expected to take another leap forward during my first match. Instead, it got knocked flat on its butt. Twice. "You'll get it next time," was all Dad said, but I could tell he was let down, and that hurt almost as much as getting punched. An early summer heat greeted me with a blast of humidity as I left the apartment building with my backpack over my shoulder and my duffel bag in hand. Thick gray clouds huddled in the distance, and I added that to the list of totally not ominous things. Glowing journal? Yep. Storm on the horizon? You betcha. Dad and Granddad stood at the curb while Nana, no one ever called her Grandma, not if you wanted to eat, knitted in the car. Dad towered over his father, but you could see their family resemblance. Deep brown skin like mine, a wide jaw, and a proud stance. I got my hair from Mom's side of the family, thankfully, because both strong men had identical bald spots peeking through their short afros. "Get him in the fields, put him to work," Granddad was saying. "That'll put some fire in his belly." Dad shrugged and said nothing. To be fair, no one did much talking when Granddad was around. That old man could yak a mile a minute. Nana saw me coming down the stairs, dropped her knitting, and rushed out of the car. "There he is. How you doing today, baby? Are you sore from last night?" She gave me a hug that muffled any answer, then shooed Granddad to the side. "Get the boy's bag, Walter." "Alvin," she said, addressing my father, "we've got to hit the road before that thunderstorm hits." Granddad looked me up and down. "Is that all you kids ever wear?" I glanced down. Black Chuck Taylors with gray untied laces, loose khaki cargo shorts, and an even looser gray hoodie. That hoodie went with me everywhere. It had a picture of a flexed bicep on the back in faded black ink. Call me sentimental, but it's what I always wore when Eddie and I were hanging out. He called it the Tristan Strong uniform of choice, perfect for all occasions. So yeah, I wear it a lot. Nana shushed him and pulled me into another hug. "Don't listen to him, Tristan. Can't wait to have you back with us on the farm. You were so little last time, but them chickens you used to chase still haven't forgotten you." Packed a lunch and even rustled up a new story or two for the ride. And so, just like that, with a clap on the shoulder from Dad and a hug from Mom, I was someone else's problem for a month. Goodbye, Chicago, and all your glorious cable TV, internet, and cell phone service. I hardly knew you. One thing became very clear during the 12-hour car ride to Alabama. I was never going to do this again. Never, ever. Sitting in an enclosed space with Granddad was like wiping your tears with sandpaper. Painful, excruciating even. And you wondered why you ever thought it was a good idea. Oh, you think I'm playing? 10 minutes into the trip, when I was your age, I had a full-time job and I'd already fought in 2 title bouts. 3 hours in. Oh, you're hungry again? Did you bring some stopping for snacks money? 6 hours in. Man, I shouldn't have ate those leftover beans for breakfast. 8 hours in. Can't believe I drove all this way to see a strong boy fight so soft. That's your grandmother's side of the family. Ain't no strong ever looked like that in the ring. Why, I remember. Well, you get it. By the time we crossed the Alabama state line, I was ready to claw my way into the trunk. I didn't know how Nana could just sit there and hum and knit for most of a day, but that's what she did. The Cadillac rumbled down a 2-lane highway, kicking up trails of dust and exhaust, a dented rocket ship blasting through time in reverse from the future to a land that Wi-Fi forgot. I put my earbuds in somewhere back in Kentucky, but the battery of my phone had long since run out. I just kept them in so no one would bother me. Nana kept knitting in the passenger seat, and Granddad tapped a finger on the steering wheel, humming along to a song only he could hear. Things seemed more or less calm, except for one thing. Eddie's journal sat on the seat beside me. Now I could have sworn I stuck that book under the clothes of my duffel bag, which Granddad had put in the trunk, and yet here it was, waiting on me to do something I'd put off since the funeral. The late afternoon sun, occasionally peeking out from behind the storm clouds, made the journal look normal, ordinary, but every so often I'd shade the cover with my hands and peek at it while still holding my breath. Yep, still glowing. Why not open it, you might ask, and see what's inside? Well, believe me, it wasn't that simple. Before Eddie's death, the cover of his brown leather journal had always been blank. Now a weird symbol appeared to be stitched into it, like a sun with rays that stretched down into infinity, or a flower with long petals. The same symbol was embossed on a carved wooden charm that dangled from a cord attached to the journal's spine. I'd seen the tassel before. Eddie had used it to mark his spot, or to flick me in the back of the head, but the charm was new. And, even more weirdly, the trinket pulsed with green light, too. I'd been staring at that book every day for minutes on end, but the glow always stopped me from opening it. I mean, I knew what was in there anyway. The stories Eddie had jotted down in his goofy, blocky handwriting, from his own silly creations to the fables Nana used to tell us when we were younger, when she'd come up to visit. John Henry, Anansi the Spider, Brer Rabbit's Adventures. I'd read them all. Our end-of-semester English project was supposed to be a giant collection of stories from our childhood. Eddie was doing the writing, and I was going to give the oral presentation. Then the accident happened. The counselor Mom took me to every Wednesday had said that I should try to finish the writing part, even though school was now over for the year, as part of healing and other stuff. Before you say something slick you might regret, Mr. Richardson is pretty cool for a counselor, you get me? We play Madden while we talk, which means I can focus on running up the score in his Raggedy Eagle squad and not on being embarrassed about answering questions. It helps, some. If it gets too tough, he knows when to back off, too, so you can keep your sensitive and man-up comments to yourself, chumps. To avoid thinking about that haunted journal, I watched the weather outside the car window. The clouds had never let up, even once we were in the deep south. They just switched from hurling lightning bolts at us to hurling fat drops of rain that splattered across the windshield like bugs. Everything everywhere was miserable, and that pretty much summed up my life at the moment. I took off the earbuds and sighed. Nana heard me and turned around in her seat to look at me. "You hungry, sweetie?" she asked. "No, not really." "No, ma'am." Granddad's deep voice rolled back from the driver's seat. "You answer, 'No, ma'am,' to your grandmother. Understand?" "Yeah." Granddad looked at me in the rearview mirror. "I mean, yes, sir." He held my eyes a moment longer, then went back to looking at the road. "Well," Nana continued, turning around and picking up her knitting, "despite what your granddad said earlier," she gave him a glare, "let me know when you are. Your mama told me you ain't been eating enough, and we're going to fix that. And don't you want to have some writing to do? That's what your counselor wants you to focus on." "Boy don't need no counselor," Granddad rumbled. "He needs to work. Ain't no time for moping when horses need feeding and fences need mending." "Walter," Nana scolded, "he needs to—" "I know what he needs." I shook my head and stopped paying attention. After spending a day in the car with them, I realized that this is what they did. They argued, they laughed, they sang, they argued again, and they knitted. Well, Nana knitted, but they were two sides of the same old coin. With Granddad, everything was about work. Work, work, work. Bored? Here's some work. Finished working? Here's some more work. Need somebody to talk to? Obviously that meant you didn't work hard enough, so you know what? Have a little bit more work. Nana, on the other hand, sang and hummed when she wasn't talking, which almost never happened because she always had a new story to share. "Did you know why the owl can't sleep?" she'd say. And off the story would go, and you'd sit there and listen, just being polite at first, but by the end, you'd be at the edge of your seat. I smiled. Eddie had loved listening to my grandmother. When she'd come to visit earlier this year, he'd practically followed her around, his journal in hand. Speaking of which, my left hand rested on top of the seat next to me, and I traced the symbol stitched into the front cover. "What's that, sweetie?" Looked up to see Nana peeking over the back seat. Yes, ma'am?" Granddad nodded, and I let out a sigh of relief. Nana smiled. "Is that for your writing?" I hesitated. "Yes, ma'am." I held the book up so she could see it, and her eyes widened at the symbol on the cover. "Where'd you get that?" she asked. Granddad turned to see what she was looking at, but Nana flipped a hand at him. "Watch the road, Walter." "From Eddie," I began, then paused. His mom gave it to me. Was for us, for our school project." "Why? What's wrong?" Could she see it? Could she tell that the book was glowing even in the daylight? Nana pursed her lips. "That symbol. Just haven't seen it in a long time." "You know what it is?" "Well," she glanced at Granddad, who had tuned us out as soon as we started talking about writing. "It's the spider's web, an old African symbol for creativity and wisdom. But it shows how tangled and complicated life can be. But with a little imaginative thinking, we can solve most of our problems and those of others." "Do you notice anything else about the journal?" I asked her. Nana laughed, a bright, joyous sound that infected anyone listening. "Is this a test?" "No, ma'am. I don't see nothing but procrastination. Go ahead and give it a try." "Yes, ma'am," I frowned. So Nana could see the symbol, the spider web, but not that it was glowing. Well, that didn't make me feel any better. Granddad smacked the steering wheel. "Y'all need to stop filling his head with that mess about symbols. He needs to stay in the real world, think about what he did wrong last night. The boy needs to focus. Boxing ain't just gonna happen. You gotta train your body and your mind." "Granddad, I don't want to hear it. You're not a kid anymore. You're strong and—" "Walter," Nana interrupted, "don't be so hard on the boy. He needs some toughening up. Y'all being too soft on him." "Now look," Nana started whispering, lecturing Granddad, who shook his head and grumbled beneath his breath. I slid down in my seat and tried to block out the argument. I let my thumb trace the cover of the journal, and before my brain could tell me not to, I yanked it into my lap and flipped to a random page. So what if it glowed? It was still a book, and reading it would be better than listening to any more of Granddad's insults disguised as life lessons, or reliving that bus accident. What really could go wrong? Chapter 2, The Bottle Trees. Two figures crouched near the base of the giant oak tree. Huge knotted roots spoiled in the center of twisting, creeping shadows. The first figure, a large black man with arms of mahogany, fists like rocks, and shoulders broader than mountains, went down on one knee in the soft, damp earth. He rested his hand on a smooth log beside him. "You sure this is necessary, B.R.?" His voice rumbled like 1,000 trains all heading to the same place. The second figure, a rabbit as big as a kindergartner, twitched nervously and snapped, "Of course I'm sure, John. Hurry up. We need to get this over with." Something clanked in the distance and the rabbit jumped. "Now!" "Okay, B.R., okay," John said. He straightened up and up and up and up until his silhouette seemed larger than the old tree. "But you need to lend this old tool some power. I can't do it alone." "Whatever, just get on with it." John picked up the log, except it wasn't a log. It was a handle, the smooth shaft of a massive hammer. Carvings were etched up and down the wood, and it hummed as giant hands found familiar grooves. John, with a hammer. No way. I knew that name. Those characters. John Henry and Brer Rabbit? But Brer Rabbit put his paws on the huge iron head of the hammer and began to speak in a low tone. His whispers swirled and grew until they sounded like shouts and drumming and stomping feet. The hammer's head, a thick nickel block marred with pits and scrapes, began to glow with blazing red-hot light, and John pressed it against a tangle of roots. A yawning black hole opened in the ground at the base of the tree. John bent over and picked up a small object off the ground. Couldn't make out what it was. "Go," he said to it, setting it gently in the hole. "Go now and find it. Find it! Find it!" Click, click, click. I yanked my hands off the journal with a gasp. Sweat poured down my face, and I was pressed against the back seat of the Cadillac as we motored along. The storm clouds had finally dissolved, and the sun was almost at the horizon, its orange and red rays pouring through the window. What was that? A dream? Had I fallen asleep while reading? And why had it felt so real? And why was the journal closed on the seat next to me? "You okay, baby?" Nana asked without turning around. Click, click, click. Her knitting needles moved furiously. Was it my imagination, or was she sweating too? "Tristan?" Click, click, click. But the pressure of that, whatever it was, still sat on my chest and locked my mouth. It felt hot and cramped and smothering in the car, like I'd been tucked in with a giant, itchy wool blanket, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. I somehow managed to lurch over to the door and open the window to try to get some fresh air. "Tristan? Boy, put that window up," Granddad barked from in front. "Letting all that dust get in here. Is you out of your mind?" One breath, two breaths. "Tristan!" Granddad twisted around, but it was Nana who placed a hand on my knee, and suddenly the pressure was gone. I reluctantly shut the window, then took a deep breath. The feelings of something pressing down on me had faded to a lurking presence. I could handle that, though it made my neck itch. Nana removed her hand, but kept peering at me, a worried look on her face. "You okay, baby?" I nodded. "Answer your grandmother when she—" "Hush, Walter," Nana scolded. "Mind the road." I shook my head. "Just got a little car sick, I think." Nana watched me as if she suspected that wasn't true, but she didn't pry any further. "Why don't you try to take a nap, dear? Only another hour or so, and then we'll be at the farm, and you and Granddad have some work to do before supper." She turned back around, but for just a second, I could have sworn her eyes glanced at the journal. Click, click, click. Nana continued knitting, and I looked at the journal on the other end of the seat. After a moment's hesitation, I reached over and shaded it with my hands, already knowing what would happen, but checking anyway. The journal pulsed quicker and stronger, the bright green glow. Sometime later, Granddad slowed down and turned onto a bumpy gravel road that climbed up a long hill. "We're here," he said. I jerked out of a daze. I slipped Eddie's journal into my backpack, then stretched and looked wearily out of the window. Everything looked, well, it looked like the country. "Yay." "We are? Where?" I asked. "Home, sweetie," Nana said, packing up her knitting and turning to smile at me again, just in time for me to get dinner started. "Still about an hour of sun left. Can at least get part of that old fence fixed," Granddad said. The car chugged to the top of the hill, and I sat up as the strong family farm sprawled out to the horizon. A patchwork quilt of green and brown fields surrounded a huge barn and a slightly smaller house. Rows of corn stood at attention as the Cadillac ambled past, like a chariot returning with the lamb's king and queen, and Nana and Granddad didn't seem to sit up straighter as we got closer to the house. Even I could feel it, a tug from something that had been in my family for generations. This was our duchy, our territory, the strong domain. My nose pressed against the window, breath fogging the glass. I spotted a stand of trees at the far corner of the farm. They were old, like a section of the forest that time had forgotten. Their twisted, giant trunks were bunched together like some sort of crowd or guards. As I stared at them, the pressure on my chest came back, the feeling from before. Someone or something was out there searching. Searching for me. A flash between the branches caught my eye as we drove past. "What's that?" I asked. "What's what, sweetie?" "In those trees over there, something shining." Granddad shook his head. "More foolishness, that's what it is." "Hush, Walter," Nana said. "That's just the bottle tree for us, baby." "The what? What sort of trees were those?" And there was another one. Something flashed again, like light on a mirror of glass. "Bottle trees. Oh, now, would you look at that?" I skipped a stitch. What was I saying? Oh, the bottle trees. I could have sworn I've talked up one wall and down the other about this before. She turned around in her seat. "Slaves carried the practice over with them from Africa as a way to capture and dispose of any haints wandering around." "Haints?" I pressed my nose against the glass and squinted. "Evil spirits, baby. Lord knows plenty of those rambled about, what with— well, anyway, don't you worry about it none," Nana continued. "I don't want you messing around over there. Them old trees aren't for playing on. You're liable to hurt yourself. Need to cut 'em down," Dad grumbled, but Nana just shooed the words away with her hand. "Hush, Walter. Now look, Tristan, over there." She started playing tour guide as we drove up to the house, and I settled back, unable to shake the tingling feeling that something weird was going on. "Grab that end, boy, and lift. Lift. Stop half-stepping and put your back into it." I heaved at the end of a log as Granddad and I slid it into the empty top slot of a pole. We dropped it into place, and I sagged against the repaired fence with a sigh. We'd been working for the last hour, racing the sun to get this section of fence fixed, and I was exhausted. I hadn't even had a chance to drop off my bags. I picked up my backpack, and Eddie's journal fell out of the open compartment. Could have sworn I closed that zipper. Granddad watched me put it away and shook his head. He mopped his forehead with an old rag he kept tucked in the back pocket of his overalls, then put it away and rolled his sleeves down. You need to leave that writing nonsense alone, boy. Ain't gonna get you nowhere but confused. I didn't say anything. What you got to write about anyway? Video games, TV, all that city life got you boys soft. I would have had your dad out here at the break of dawn. How do you think he got them heavyweight shoulders? Strong's work, boy. I squeezed the straps of my backpack until they cut into my palms, but I didn't say anything. He spat out the twig he was chewing. Go on then, and run that extra wire back to the barn. Then clean up for dinner. Hurry up now, your grandmother's waiting. I grabbed the spool of wire and stalked down the trail toward the barn. I heard Granddad grumbling to himself, and I tried to ignore it. No matter what I did or where I went, someone always wanted to tell me what I was doing wrong and what I should do different. You're pretty big, Tristan. Go play football. Stop reading comic books, Tristan, and go read a real book. Stop. I looked up, suddenly aware that the world had gone quiet. I mean, nothing made a sound. No birds, no squirrels, no rustling leaves. Even the wind held its breath. The old stand of trees loomed in front of me. How long had I been walking? How had I found myself here? The shadows on the ground deepened and stretched toward me. Thick vines around the trunks seemed to curl like fingers beckoning me closer. They felt desperate, needy. The trees grew larger and larger, and it took me a second to realize that it was because I was walking toward them. Find it. The words boomed and crashed in my head, a thunderstorm of a command, and I froze. They were the same words, the same voice from the dream in the car. That had been a dream, right? I had reached the edge of the trees. A breeze gusted softly from the dark center of the forest, almost like a breath. It smelled old, earthy, like whatever was in there hadn't been disturbed in years. I didn't want to be the first new intruder, and yet I took a step forward. Tristan! Tristan! Nana's voice broke whatever spell had fallen over me, and I shook my head to clear the cobwebs. My right foot hovered in the air, inches away from entering the shadows. I slowly placed it on the ground and then retreated a few steps. I squinted into the trees. Something was in there, and it wanted me. I could feel it. Tristan, dinner time! Nana's voice floated out of the sky, riding the breeze in the way only an elder's voice could. I backed up further and then turned and ran through the cornfield to the farmhouse. No way are you going in those woods, I told myself. No way. I was wrong. And this is a good stopping place at the end of the chapter, so next week we'll find out what happens when he goes into the trees. If you get a chance, if you're interested, I strongly suggest that you go to YouTube and look up Rick Riordan's interview with the author of this book, Kwame Mbalia. It's very interesting, and I think you'll really enjoy it. See you next week. Bye.